So the .NET Conf a couple of weeks ago was the launch of .NET 5, and .NET 5 is this the latest version of .NET Core. Really, it sees the retirement of the .NET framework as an ongoing thing, and from this point onwards, there is the word core has been dropped from the product, and it's just going to be known as .NET 5 or .NET 6 going on forward. And it's the unification of the .NET platform in that sense. And the vision for one.NET is a unified set of libraries, tools, and a runtime, and taking everything available in .NET Core, adding a few cloud and web investments with some new features, such as the single file applications and smaller container images, and a few other bits and pieces like investments in ASP.NET with Blazor, full Swagger support, being able to create testable, compatible APIs using OpenAPI, which Mike will show shortly, and also some investments in the Windows desktop environments, sort of WinForms and WPF, with some improvements in third-party control and support, and the arrival of Click Once support once again for desktop environments, and this sort of single file deployment allows you to do just to compile your application down to a single file and deliver that to people to run self-contained on their application without any framework or core installation required. Lots of performance improvements as well, support for ARM64, and new releases of C#9 and F#5. And it's also interesting that quite a lot of improvements have been made in the .NET 5 stack over the last year have been from open source contributors outside Microsoft, who've made thousands of contributions to the core product, and that shows a real investment, a real sort of sea change in the way Microsoft think about these things in adopting this open source policy, this way of embracing open source and external contributions. So Visual Studio 2019 was also released, 16.8, which includes .NET 5 with some productivity improvements. New Roslyn analyzers are now in the .NET 5 SDK, better IntelliSense completion, and some inline parameter name hinting that's going on. With the IntelliCode feature, you can now train a custom model, a custom AI model on your C# code bases, and it will start to suggest contextual completions for your own types and your own things inside your code base. There's some improvements to the areas around Git with the new Git menu, some new changes to the Git changes window, and some better ways of visualizing merges in the Git workflow. You can now debug manage Linux directly, core dumps directly in Visual Studio, and you can do some .NET Core debugging with the WSL2 using any of the Linux distros that you want to use. That features in preview, but should be coming out of preview very shortly. There's some new features in XAML with hot reloading in WPF, and GitHub Actions is becoming integrated much more closely inside Visual Studio, and there's some improvements around using that for ASP.NET core applications. The journey of Blazor is continuing apace. So .NET 5 includes full support for building full stack applications for Blazor Server and WebAssembly. The WebAssembly apps now use the core framework libraries from .NET 5, so you get access to the entire .NET 5 surface area. There's been some improvements in WebAssembly. It's 2 or 3 times faster than the previous release. And WebAssembly also supports server-side pre-rendering and lazy loading of app dependencies now, which makes your applications start up much more quickly. There's some features like CSS isolation, JavaScript isolation, and new components for radio button groups, and allows you to set the UI focus much more effectively now. This means that you can now build some really, really clever, some really excellent applications, just the client-side applications running entirely in the browser, just using C# without needing to drop out to JavaScript at all, really, which is a great feature for some of us who aren't that keen on JavaScript. There's an explosion, really, of third-party tools and controls and tools as lots of the vendors are getting on board with Blazor and seeing it as a very definite thing for the future. And as Microsoft plow more and more interest and more features into it. There's been quite a few improvements around the back end as well for cloud native stuff. And at this point, I'm going to ask Mike to take over and show us some of the things that you can now do in Visual Studio with the Open API.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Just leave your slide on a moment. It might be easier to talk over that for a moment. Yeah, so there's been some improvements to REST APIs around the Open API sort of space. And I've got a sentence here about Open API, which is probably a good explanation. So it says, the Open API specification defines a standard language agnostic interface to RESTful APIs, which allows both humans and computers to discover and understand the capabilities of a service without access to the source code, documentation, or through network traffic inspection. When properly defined, a consumer can understand and interact with a remote service with minimal amounts of implementation logic. Yeah, so some APIs are simple, some are vastly complicated with lots of endpoints and different verbs, different ways you can interact with it. And often you get told to interact with a service and you need to know somewhere to start, really. And if there's documentation, then that's a good thing. So this implementation, it supports something called REPL, Redevel Print Loop, which is a command line tool, which I'm not going to show you. And it supports client generation, so generation of documents and testing services, which you can use to interact, one of which is Swagger. And it supports these things out of the box. So things like this have existed before. So think back in .NET 2 with SOAP APIs, you had a file extension called the ASMX file, and it used to bring this thing up called the web service definition layer, and you could kind of loosely interact with it and fire a few things at an API, and it was all XML based, but things have moved on since then, and Swagger's become like the main open source, the main used system. Certainly when I look at APIs, if it's got Swagger available, it's like, oh, thumbs up, like I can easily sort of have a poke around with this and see what it does. And it's always been possible in .NET, or certainly in .NET Core in recent years, but it relied on some NuGet packages, one of which is called Swashbuckle, and lots of configuration things, but it's now baked in, turned on by default, but you don't have to have it. So it might be that you want it for sort of development use, but you don't want to ship it with a production API, but lots of production APIs do. So it kind of depends on your use case, really. I'm going to see if I can share my screen to Visual Studio. Let's have a look at that. Shift zoom out of the way. Now, is that coming out on Twitch, or do we need Rick to down his? I think you might need to stop sharing, Rick. Okay, that's better. So, I mean, this might be quite basic stuff for some people, but if you're not somebody that makes APIs or isn't aware of this, then it would be quite a nice little demo. So I've created a Daft API just for tonight, and it's based on meetups. So I've just got this sort of class here of a meetup and the things that make up a meetup. So it's got a date, a title, a summary, what the food is, and what the beverages are, and what the swag is. And I've got a meetup controller where I've kind of defined some of these things. So we've got some swag here. We've got a bit of Raccoon, the usual JetBrains license and all that, a Windows Phone, look at that. And the food, it's pizza or pizza, really. I've got some drinks, some made up titles, and like a description of a talk. And I've just got like an API endpoint here, a GET request called Get Random Meetup, and it's just going to pick any sort of combination of those things at random, depending on what's in the array. So the food will always be pizza, but and the date, it's going to pick a date in the next 90 days and add 8 o'clock, our preferred start time. So if we just fire this thing up now, it loads the Swagger page by default, which looks like this, which you will have seen on other non.NET APIs that use Swagger. So it has the endpoint here, and it's got the schema. So it's got the schema for meetup, and it will tell us that we've got dates, food, swag, those sorts of things. And if you click the get piece, then it's got no input parameters, and it will return these things or this schema again. And you can click try it out and execute, and you'll see it generates an output. I'm not sure if you can hear this, but there's a helicopter going over usefully. So if you run this multiple times, it will hopefully pick random different stuff in there. So I can make that a bit more. We can add another API on. So like genuinely, what is the next meetup? So we're going to have one on the 15th, which is like a Christmas social one. So I'm just filling these things in sort of manually at this stage. And if I go back to my page, refresh that. You'll see I've got two endpoints now. Now what can happen, well, we'll just try that one. So we'll try it out, and here's our Christmas social. Now what can happen is, as you build your API up, you might end up with dozens of these endpoints, and there won't all be GET requests. There'll be posts and deletes and all manner of other things. And yeah, we've got kind of a friendly URL, but there's not really any information here about what this does. So what you can do with this Swagger integration in Visual Studio is use these sort of triple slash summary tags. So there's a bit of a gotcha here, that you have to go into your project settings, click the build tab, and hit this XML documentation file setting, and then it will give you an XML file. Then in startup.cs, if I roll down slightly, so here's the stuff that generates for Swagger. So if you did want this to be kind of development only, you could wrap this in an if statement to say if it's development environment, or otherwise, like, don't do this. But we're just going to add the comments thing on here, and IntelliSense kind of knows about this. So back here in the meetup definition, I've not put one on for swag. So IntelliSense is saying missing XML comment for publicly visible typo member meetup.swag. So we'll just stick that back on. I'm only coming if there's prizes. So what should happen now, if I go back to the browser and refresh, all of these things come out with it. So you can immediately see that the two endpoints have got kind of a description of what they're for. Oh, that's a random meetup, and that's the genuine one. The schema definition has got a definition of what these things actually mean, like food. Why are they talking about food? Oh, right, so the refreshments on offer at the meetup. So it's just making the system friendlier to those that are going to consume this this service. And again, in each of these, we can view that information now with the interesting bits of information, the help, if you like. So yeah, where Swagger comes into its own for me isn't on GET requests. It's on POST requests or interactive requests. So we're just going to add one of those in. So we've got a fictional API where somebody's going to donate a prize. So it's based on the Christmas.NET North, and we're going to ask somebody to donate a prize. And this doesn't do anything, there's no database, but you can imagine this would then possibly go away and store this prize somewhere. But in our case, it's just going to give the same as the next meetup one, but with the offered prize. So we refresh that, we can see we've got a post request option now. Friendly URL, please let me donate a prize for the next meetup. And it knows that it takes a string for the prize, and it returns the usual schema. So if we try that out and we put in, I don't know, an Xbox Series X, and execute that, you can see it's returned the data along with our prize. And yes, it's a stupid API. It's a dummy thing, but this is really useful when you're dealing with a real API to actually test it before you start coding it. Perhaps maybe you don't quite understand it and you want to see what it does. But usually you're not just poking in a single piece of data. You might be sending JSON data in. So I've got a fourth endpoint, also a post request, and it's going to take this new class called sustenance, and that is a food item and a beverages item. Again, with the help classes, so it's a food pizza, and what drinks are they? And it's going to stick the sustenance stock food in the food and the sustenance stock beverages in the beverages. So I save that and refresh. Been too quick there. So you can see I've got 2 post options now. I've got the supply sustenance. That next meetup, can I arrange the catering? So we've had this request with in-person events in the past with people that say, oh, can I sponsor the pizza? Can I give this? This could be an actual API that we built one time. So you can see on this one, it's taking a JSON representation of these 2 values. Now, and you can find out that it's a sustenance, so you can find out, well, what's this all about? I find this really useful because lots of people use Postman or tools like that for testing APIs, and which are great in their own right. But when APIs take JSON as the input, it can be a bit clunky because you need to preform the JSON or type it in the Postman window. Whereas what you can do with this is try it out and it will pre-populate that for you. So we're just going to change that to we'll have toast, and we'll have chewits. We're going to have some beverages. We'll have iron brew, green tea, and cider for Rick. So we can execute that, and we'll see those things go in. So really, this Swagger gives you an awful lot very cheaply. So it automatically generates the definitions of the endpoints, the kind of the expected parameters, and what it returns. So whether it's a class or it might just return a string or whatever, it will sort that out for you. But being able to give it humanly readable explanations as to the endpoints and the data types simply through these summary tags, which you might be putting in anyway in parts of your system, is really useful. And it's all turned on by default. Is that slight switch to get the help file to go out. But it's a step in, it's a definite step in the right direction, because it has been embarrassing a bit in the past where you consume someone else's API and they've got all this stuff built in and offer one of these Swagger pages, and you think, oh, that's great, you integrate with their API, and then they ask for your API and you've not got any of this. You've got some rubbishy document somebody's written, and what they really want is a version of this. So it's there and it's ready to use. And that's it on OpenAPI. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I believe we're going to JSON with the next bit that was on that slide of Rick's, which is about gRPC.
Hello there. Oh, is that working?
Yeah, that's good.
It is. That's good. Excellent. It's reassuring. Right. Hello. All right. I'm going to share my screen first of all. If I can find the button. Oh, for God's sake. Screen. Right here. Okay. So I'm not an expert on gRPC. Definitely not. In fact, up till about 2 days ago, I knew very little about it, apart from it being some kind of fancy pants thing that kind of like proper programmers do somewhere far away, kind of thing. But as a preparation for this, we needed to give overviews of different topics, and I chose this video. Half as an excuse to kind of have to figure out what gRPC is, because it sounds exciting, and also half because it's presented by James Newton King, of course, the JSON guy. I've always wondered what it looks like. That's what it looks like. Yeah, so he as part of .NET Conf, he's done this video, this deep dive, I suppose you'd call it, of gRPC, which he's working on currently. And I recommend, if you're interested in it, please go and watch the proper video rather than this. Right, so the video though, it's presenting gRPC as a new thing, as kind of like a new amazing offering with .NET 5. it's actually a thing of many parts. gRPC. I didn't realise, and it doesn't. And none of the materials seem to make it clear that gRPC has been supported on .NET since 2016. It's not really a new technology, but they have been doing work on it of late. And a lot of the new things are kind of like in sync with the .NET 5 release, but they're not reliant on a .NET 5 release. As I've been working on my demo, it's been possible to use this .NET Core 3.1. Everything's perfectly fine on that. I think what is new in .NET 5 is some new kind of performance stuff using like ref structs and strange kind of spans and things like that. I think basically they're doing the same thing that they did with the kind of new generation JSON serialization, and really the chasing headlines. I think they want to make the very fastest possible gRPC framework, and they've kind of succeeded. I'll show you the amazing graph. I don't really know what these numbers mean, but you know the big numbers look all right. I suppose it's most meaningful if you compare with the competition. So the .NET 5 .NET gRPC library, it's almost the fastest in the world. Just behind one of the Rust libraries, it seems. But ahead of C++, ahead of Go, far ahead of Java. I see Python down there, and not doing very well. So that's kind of exciting and impressive. It makes you feel like .NET is slightly more on the cutting edge. It's quite nice. Right, so anyway, that's that. But I suppose it doesn't really answer the first question, which is what is gRPC? First of all, the G stands for Google because it's a Google protocol that Microsoft's taken on as part of being kind of like the new Microsoft that kind of like collaborate more with kind of other technologies in the world instead of kind of building their own things all the time. So G for Google, RPC. Stands for remote procedure call, which is really a fancy way of saying calling things on other machines as if you're just invoking a method. Basically, that's what RPC is all about. It's all about abstracting away the network and just pretending that everything is network call, which has advantages and disadvantages. But I'm not going to go into that because I've got a demo. Although before I go into the demo, I'll say it's interesting this being after Mike's thing, because I think these two approaches to communicating between applications like REST and gRPC, they're kind of like in symmetry in a kind of way, in some kind of opposite kind of way. REST is, I think, well, I'm far more familiar from my day-to-day life with REST. It's all about kind of servers presenting resources for clients to kind of investigate and inspect and find ways to communicate with. And that gives rise to things like the API Swagger stuff that Mike was talking about then. That kind of like generates documentation, almost like it is a contract, but it's kind of like a documentation contract from the code. gRPC goes the opposite direction. In gRPC, it's all about this. If I find my thing, which I hope you can see all right. I'll try the Zoom. There we go. That's the Zoom functionality. It's all about this. It's all about the proto file. It's all about generating the contract up front. Please zoom out and zoom back in again. Get rid of that. And then using the upfront contract. It's basically like a file of typings, really, for types of interfaces to then automatically generate clients and server serialization bits. This is my own Daft API. You might be able to see it's pet shop themed, obviously, and it's a strange. Well, this is also a protobuf file. A protobuf is used by gRPC. It's a serialization framework. It's a bit like kind of JSON, but kind of far more efficient in terms of space. I think is the main thing. It's very compact, which means it's and also very easy to serialize and deserialize. So much faster than JSON. So gRPC uses a protobuf serialization framework, and this is a protobuf schema. And if you look at it, it's like some kind of weird kind of alternate world that looks a bit like C#, but isn't. I think it looks a bit more like C# because it's got the same coloring in the IDE. But it's close enough you can kind of like work out what it's doing. The main confusing thing that got me when I first came across this was the fact that things that we'd call kind of classes in C# are called messages in protobuf, because it's all about the sending and the receiving. Whereas I suppose in programming we're thinking about these classes like sitting there doing things. In protobuf land, it's all about sending them. So it calls them messages, even though for us we'd call these classes. And they all have like kind of scary types like int32, and you can even have like in fact, if I get this out, you can even have like signed integers and things like this, so like all sorts of like kind of low level kind of like things, because it's all about saving space basically. And confusing thing number 2 before I move on will be the numbers here. These aren't actually assigning values. These are assigning kind of positions in the serialization frame format. I won't say anything more about that, but that's just to kind of give you a taste of protobuf as being a low-level kind of like slightly scary thing, but it's fast. But gRPC, it uses all this stuff, but it also introduces services into the world of protobuf with these RPC prefixes, and that just basically means method. That means these are basically just methods that can be called. And that's the argument. That's the return type. A pretty amazing thing that I didn't realise with gRPC is that it doesn't necessarily just receive one thing and return one thing. It can also return streams of things, and also receive streams of things and return streams of things. It's actually a fully duplex protocol where the client, once it connects, can send things in a stream to the server, and simultaneously the server can stream things back again, which really opens lots of doors in terms of kinds of communication. See, my expectation was that gRPC was really Microsoft's WCF replacement, and I think it is. That's what it's being positioned as. But with the streaming, it's basically replacing Signal R. I think it's the same thing. It's basically this amazing kind of all singing, all dancing kind of communication framework for doing both push and pull based communication. So yeah, anyway, that's great. And you can obviously find more material on the internet to find out more about this, instead of me prattling on about this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a quick run through of actually how to get a very simple gRPC app running. Most things on the internet tell you to basically download and run the template, and there's basically a ready-made template you can use that probably does it even quicker than this. But doing this way is also pretty quick. So you start out with the contract file, the source of truth that you have to create up front, and then you need to generate the code from it. I'll show you the CS proj file just to show you what libraries are involved in this. So obviously currently it's proto file, it's not C# file, it doesn't know what to do with it. But all you need to do is just include this package. And again, I'll say if you use a template, all this stuff will be in place already. I'm just saying this for kind of like for interest, I suppose. This gRPC tools package, it's been around for many years. If you bring this in, it hooks into MS Build. It doesn't need any particular ID. You can use it in VS Code. You can use it in Rider, like here. You can also use it in Visual Studio, and it will it makes available this protobuf item group type. You just need to basically put in a file selecting little expression here that will match it. In fact, let's bring in these two. Just ignore these two. These are kind of supporting kind of framework things you also need. And then once you build the thing, I was kind of hoping it would automatically, but I think you do have to build it like this. You'll see kind of like code behind style. If you go into the object thing, what the gRPC tool has created are basically loads of base classes. And like just really horrible things, but automatically generated things that you don't need to look at, you don't need to worry about. In fact, it's not even code behind. It's kind of like partly kind of compile. Well, yeah, the kind of generated things that are being hidden in the object folder that you don't need to look at. But I'm showing you just to reassure you, this is all it's doing. It's just generating these subclasses, basically these base classes, and that will generate. And what I'll show you here. That will generate kind of like I suppose like a model of base classes that you can then subclass to put your proper business logic in, or if not business logic, just some let's say business logic for the time being. So the pet shop service here, for instance, it derives from pet shop base. It's been automatically created, and then it overrides all these abstract methods it receives from the superclass with the business logic in, and all these domain classes are also the automatically generated things that you could, in fact, you have to use a partial class kind of mechanism to extend them instead of subclassing. I think it's only the services you can subclass, but it's extensible anyway, extendable. I'll go back to the thing. Just wait. And at this point, when you've done this, you've basically got a gRPC service that can be plugged into some kind of transport mechanism, and gRPC can kind of go across many different things. But the accepted way of doing it, well, the main way of doing it is over HTTP2, which is just basically HTTP. And of course, in .NET Core, we have our way of dealing with HTTP is ASP.NET Core with Kestrel server, and there is now, if I bring the thing in, there is this package gRPC ASP.NET Core server that takes gRPC classes and basically lets you plug them into an ASP.NET Core pipeline. So I'll show you the emails of this, but I suppose I should mention one of the many confusing things with this is there are multiple protocols involved. So gRPC is a binary protocol. Well, because protobuf is a binary protocol, it packs the bits, but it's sent over HTTP2. So say a client was calling a server with a set of gRPC, it would still be sending HTTP headers. There'd still be a URL, there'd be a path, there'd be all these things. There were normal HTTP authentication mechanisms, TLS and things like that, all very familiar. But when it comes to the actual processing of the incoming request, this package winds up like so. Here, just under endpoints, map gRP service, almost like it's just a controller, because it's basically just a controller. Just at the end of the HTTP pipeline, the very short one here. And this would pass the requests and response streams over to the gRPC bit, which is provided by the automatic kind of like code generation stuff. And you can see there's very, very little code involved. Like I said, there's that one package. There's a really bare bones ASP.NET Core app. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible just to show there's very little involved. In fact, you just have to add gRPC and then map the service that you've subclassed. Like you could have authentication and stuff like proper things there as well if it was a proper solution, which is that simple. Right, and with that, as a finale, I'm going to show I'm going to show you it in action. If I run the thing, you might be wondering how do you kind of like make calls to it. I mean, it is HTTP. It does go over HTTP2. So you could make calls to it with Postman, but you wouldn't see much. Basically, all the bodies would be kind of gobbledygook, even though the calls would complete. You'd need to use a special thing. This is the best one I found. It's called BloomRPC. It's basically like it is basically Postman or something pretending to be Postman for gRPC. And what you do is you don't need to read any Swagger documentation or anything like that or formula in requests. What you need to do is import the source of truth, the proto file, which I'll now fail to find in front of your eyes. Where is it? It's here, proto file. See, and just from that, it knows what method is available. If you want to buy Parrot. Sorry, just let me just do this. This is a potential obstacle. Actually, you need to make sure certificates are properly in place to do this. That's quite easy. There are obviously quite good short tutorials on the internet how to solve that. But that took me like half an hour or so. It's just Oh, look at that! It's you've ordered a parrot, and Agnes the African grey parrot, £500 has come back. How amazing! And you can see here, it's just the familiar ASP.NET Core pipeline there. The familiar path there. Yeah, anyway, you get that kind of thing. And also you can okay, so in fact, yeah, so this one returns back not one result, it returns 3 via a stream if you remember the streams in the initial contract. So that's first of all returns Shiba, then it goes back and thinks about it, and then it returns Kitty Cat, and then finally IAMS. Then the final one. I need to press the TLS thing again because it doesn't automatically match it, which is annoying. And at this point, this really is the grand finale of the presentation, but I don't understand how to use the software properly. I don't understand how this interface is supposed to work. Because if you think about it, sending a stream with multiple things to send, and then multiple things coming back from the server, it's actually a very difficult thing to kind of like navigate in terms of UI. And also, including RPC, have had this problem, and I don't think they've solved this, or rather, I've not invested the effort to figure out how it works properly. But you can send multiple things, and hopefully, if it works, please work. Oh, it's not working, but it was working before. It was sending back multiple things before. I can't remember how to bloody do it. It's going to work now. No, it's not. But the bidirectional stream thing is amazing though. It's an amazing thing that the clients can send things in streams to servers at the same time as servers are sending things, not necessarily in a coordinated way either. It can be completely independent to the client. It can be both push based and pull based at the same time. It's really amazing. And that ends my demo. And I'll hand over to Rick at this point.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mike. Interesting stuff there, gRPC and the built-in Swagger stuff. I think that's really very interesting. So moving on, C#9 has got some really interesting new features, quite a few new things in C#9, one of which is records, which are records have taken a long time to make it into the product. It's been talked about for several years, records, but they finally arrived in C#9. Records are kind of a lightweight type of class. They're very useful for data transfer objects because they hold state, but they don't hold behavior. And they do have some useful things with the with expression, which I'll show in a second. C#9 also has some pattern matching improvements, some in-if-only setters, and some top-level statements. Just quickly have a look at a couple of those. So a record type essentially allows you to collapse all this boilerplate you see at the top, which you will, and we all have written hundreds and hundreds of times, collapse that into a single declaration you see at the bottom of the public record. So it generates a constructor and public getters and setters for everything in the parentheses, which is really neat, really useful for just transferring data between point A and point B. But also has a couple of really interesting features as well. This sort of deconstructor syntax, which allows you to deconstruct a record type into variables using this var inside parentheses construct, which is really nice. And this thing at the bottom is demonstrates the with expression. So it allows you to clone a person object, but change any of the properties as part of that cloning operation, which is really nice. You may have used this. I've used this a lot in testing code, but you have to write extension methods to make that work. This sort of builds it into the language, which is really quite neat. In-its-only setters are use this syntax you see in the first line, and they are setters that can only be accessed during the construction phase of the class. So you could have a class like a weather observation here, which accepts a when value in the constructor, and you're allowed to set that recorded at property during the construction phase. But once the object has been completely initialized, that then is a read-only property. So you can't do the line at the bottom recorded at trying to change that value is no longer allowed. So allows you to just create, set those properties during the construction phase. There's a few other bits and pieces. This one is quite interesting. Top level statements. This on the left, you'll see what you will create whenever you start a new create a new console application in C#. You'll get this boilerplate. It's you and I know what that means, but it's deemed a little bit difficult for people who are coming from other languages to kind of understand what's all this squiggly bracket stuff when all I want to do is print a line to the console. And top level statements basically do away with all of this now. So you can replace that stuff on the left with the stuff on the right at the top, or even if you want to qualify with the full namespace, that can be written as a single line, system.console.writeline, hello world. And that's just a minor improvement, I think, to make the approachability of C# a little bit easier compared to some modern languages. Quite a few improvements in Xamarin, and Pete is now going to talk us through some of those. I'll stop sharing my screen, Pete, if you want to take over.
Okay, cheers, Rick. I will just find my presentation and share that. Right, just checking it was shared. I was going to show a YouTube video here of the wonderful Maddie Leisure talking about mobile development with Xamarin, but I've got some links later on, so we can dispense with that. So Xamarin, enabling C# in Xamarin and .NET standard projects, courtesy of James Montemagno. Aidan pointed me at this the other day, and James has done a blog post, which I've got a link to later, that shows you can enable C# 9 in Xamarin projects. So by default, you get a language based on these rules, and if you're using .NET Standard 2, default for Xamarin Forms, you only get 7.3. But you can override this. So if you open your CS proj file and add lang version, or you can pick the specific version of C# that you would like, you're ready to start using C# 9 and convert all those classes over to records, more or less. But you'll get an error. So system.runtime compiler services is not defined or imported. So if you add into assemblyinfo.cs this code, that will sort that. So that's a link to James's blog about this, and a link there. So what we will do is hopefully a demo. So if I change what I'm sharing and I share this and wait to see it appear on Twitch, and it does. So I pinch people's ideas. Mike and Jason did live coding. I've been bitten in the past doing live coding, so I took a leaf out of the wonderful Mike Tolty's book. So I recorded my coding earlier on. So we're just going to create a Xamarin project straight out of the box. So pick it, next. I have an area on my machine called delete me where I can play about and then just get rid of it because I know I don't need it. So we create a new project, C# 9. Pick the flyout version and then sit back for a couple of minutes while Visual Studio opens everything up, creates everything, and as you'll see in the bottom, it takes its time making a connection to my Mac, which is sat 2 feet away from where we are. So we've got a connection to the Mac. So I've just changed it so that we're deploying to an iPhone simulator, iPhone 12, why not? So if you look at the models, it's created as by default public class of item with ID, text and description. and in the app.xaml.cs, which I was looking for here and found, set up a dependency service and register a mock data store, which sets up a new of the list item and adds half a dozen items to the list. So if we hit run, compile the app, and I should probably have cut a chunk out here, but this is a reasonably fast machine, reasonably. Point out that if you're going to do this, you need the latest version of Visual Studio 16.8. I'm using 4.8 XAML Forms here. I think you can use the XAML Forms 5 preview. And the other thing to bear in mind when we come to change this, resharper doesn't play nicely with records. You finish up with loads of red squiggles. So this is deploying the simulator. So as I say, it's the standard Xamarin project. So browse the records and we see from the item description, we get all those there. We can go in, we can add a text and a description, add it to the list, save it, and it appears there. Click on it and we can get the details. So if we move this to C#9, so start the project. So the first thing I think we need to do, reading from what James told us, is open the CS proj file. So open the CS proj file, change it to .NET Standard 2.1 and add a lang version. As we said in the comments before, 9.0. So if we save that, if we go into the item class, no, sorry, go to assembly and add in the code that was needed. So we got that in a snippet. So the is external init. So again, public class is external init. We put that in there. Go into the item. We have another snippet. Which is hopefully item record. So now we've got a public record item rather than a public class item with exactly the same things. As Rick said earlier, we can change that to do the initialization in one line, everything like that. But we've got public record. So if we go back into the data store, we've got everything exactly the same. Goes to the definition, it goes to the record rather than the item. So what we're going to do now is rebuild that, redeploy it to our simulator. And trust me, it will deploy. There we go. And as before, got the same screens. We can click browse our records. So we've got the items. We could add a new one. .NET North again. Different description. Damn you, autocorrect. It's Xamarin, not Cameron. got there. And we put C# and write it out rather than put a hash, because I don't know where the hash is on the keyboard. Save that. .NET North, click on it, and we get the details. So we've changed the Xamarin project that we built from the default out of the box, changed it to C#9, use records. So as I say, if you follow the link to James's presentation, you should see that. So we should be able to go back to our slideshow. Share that. So a few links. Great sessions. Xamarin Forms 5 with Maddie and David Ortino. Cross-platform application with Xamarin Forms. 3D printed bionic hand. IoT and Xamarin Forms app. Cliff Aegis. Cracking application. He's got a neighbour's child who had no arm. He's built him a false arm and everything. It's great to watch. ML.NET, Azure and Xamarin, best friends forever, and validation rules for Xamarin. So Maddie's got about 10 minutes in the keynote, and then there's 5 more Xamarin Form YouTube videos in the rest of it. So if I go back to the presentation now, which I'll start and then share my screen again. Share. And hopefully we can see that. And I apologize, I need to go back to Rick now. So if I stop sharing and hand back to Rick.
Okay. Let me put my slides back up. Okay, thanks, Pete. That was interesting stuff there. Lots of new stuff in Xamarin and some more stuff coming down the line very quickly soon in the next year. So we have got a huge amount of time left, so I'm going to run through these next few slides fairly quickly, but these are just a few of the interesting things that were announced, which encourage you to go and have a look at if you're interested. And there's also loads and loads of videos from the second day of .NET Conf on YouTube, lots of really good content. Even I haven't had a chance to look through all of it yet, but some really interesting stuff. So if anything here has whet your appetite, you're interested in knowing a bit more in detail about any of these topics or some of the other things that were mentioned, then I encourage you to have a look at that YouTube website where there's loads and loads of stuff from day 2 and 3. So Project Pi is this new project from Microsoft. It's still in development at the moment. It's still in beta, but essentially it provides an abstraction on top of microservices to make it much easier to deploy microservices by giving the ability to discover services through configuration conventions, adding dependencies by declaration rather than having to write Docker files, and allows you to run and debug locally using containers and Kubernetes clusters, and provides some really good instrumentation for understanding what's going on in the cluster, and allows you to deploy stuff onto Azure really easily. There's some really good talks about that on the session, and you can build an application into a Docker into a containerizable suite and deploy it in a matter of less than a minute. It was really impressive. Lots of new things in desktop apps. Mentioned those at the beginning, but one of the most interesting things for me is Click Once Installer, which I used years and years ago to deploy stuff to desktops, and it kind of went away, but has now come back, and is a really useful way of for people who still have to work on desktop applications to actually deliver them to desktops without all the hassle of having to send around floppy disks. Floppy disks? Oh yeah, floppy disks. Remember them. Microsoft also now confirmed that they have a way of making sure that if you've been deploying stuff to Azure App Services in the last couple of years, it's been a bit annoying that when new versions of the of .NET Core have been released, the app services lag behind in the implementation of those. So you've been able to build on your desktop, on your laptop, a service with the latest version of .NET Core, but not actually deploy it to Azure, strangely. But from now on, the new runtime services inside Azure App Service will make sure that whatever version is out live of the .NET, I want to call it framework, but the next version of .NET will be supported immediately on Azure App Service. The other really interesting thing is coming soon. It's still in beta, but I've been playing with it for the last couple of weeks, and it's really very good. Is GitHub Code Spaces, and essentially what this does is clouderize your development environment, so you can fire up Visual Studio, connect to a code space in Azure, tell it what GitHub repository to use, and it will get the code from GitHub, restore it onto a machine in the cloud, install all dependencies, and then you can code away and debug in the cloud when directly from your laptop, but with no actual code touching your laptop at all. Really very clever. So you can code on all sorts of environments. You don't need a really high power laptop to do coding anymore. You can just connect to a code space, and you can also tell these code spaces to spin themselves down after a certain amount of time. So if you wander off, go to make a cup of tea, or you forget to switch off at the end of the day, these things aren't consuming CPU cycles and energy over the weekend while you're away in Paris or whatever. Not that we go to Paris anymore. But code spaces are really good, really interesting stuff. Currently in beta, expected some point in the next year. Really clever. So a couple of slides just covered over some of the stuff that was in code spaces. And the really interesting thing is that you do pay for them, but with the auto suspend, it means you're never going to be in that position where you've left something on for 3 weeks and suddenly find your Azure bill has gone through the roof, or your financial director is phoning up to ask why his credit card has melted. And the last thing to mention is that .NET is now on a very predictable release cadence. So .NET 5's released in November this year, and going forward there will be a new version of .NET major release every November, and the long-term support versions will be the even numbered versions going forward. So .NET 5 is not a long-term support version, but .NET 6 out next year will be. LTS versions are supported for 3 years, so anything you build on an even number version will be supported for 3 years. The non-LTS versions are effectively supported until the next major version comes out, plus a little bit. So .NET 5 will be supported till early 2022, but the .NET 6 version out in November 2021 will be supported for until November 2024 at the earliest. Also should just mention that a lot of people are stuck on .NET Framework, and I understand a lot of people are stuck on .NET Framework, and getting away from .NET Framework can be very painful and a difficult thing to do. It's important to realize that if you are still on .NET Framework, that although Framework has effectively finished development, it's feature complete, it will get nothing more than security updates going forward. Microsoft have kind of promised that as long as there is a version of Windows, they will support Framework. So Framework isn't going to die. They're not going to turn Framework off anytime in the future. They are committed to supporting Framework effectively forever, however long that will be. And those of us who were writing applications back in the VB6 days will know that you can still actually install the VB6 application on your Windows machine, Windows 10 machine right now, and it will work.